At my daughter's Sweet 16, my neighbor had cops raid us claiming it was a drug party. They tackled her, arrested her, and killed her scholarship while he watched laughing, so I showed up at his foreclosure hearing with police reports and witnesses. I still remember the blue and red lights flashing across our living room walls like some sick disco. My daughter, Maya, was in her pink birthday dress, crying on the driveway while two cops pinned her down, one with his knee on her back. Her friends were screaming, phones out, music still faintly playing from the Bluetooth speaker someone had dropped in the grass. It was supposed to be her Sweet 16, nothing crazy, just family, a few classmates, a rented taco truck, some balloons. But 20 minutes into the party, our neighbor, Greg Miller, was standing on his porch with a beer in hand, glaring at us like we'd committed a crime just by having fun. He'd been a pain since we moved in, noise complaints, fake HOA notices, the works. I just thought he was one of those bitter old men who hated seeing anyone else happy. Then, the cops pulled up. 3 cruisers. They jumped out like it was a drug bust, shouting commands, telling everyone to get on the ground. My daughter froze, terrified. She kept saying, "It's my birthday, sir, I didn't do anything." They didn't listen. One of the officers, said they got an anonymous call reporting underage drinking and possible narcotics. Total lie. There wasn't even alcohol. When they slammed Maya down, Greg raised his beer, laughing. "Told ya, not in my neighborhood," he yelled across the lawn. I tried to go to her, but another cop pushed me back and threatened to arrest me too. All I could do was watch while they handcuffed my baby and dragged her to a cruiser like she was a criminal. The next day, the local paper ran the headline, "Police break up teen drug party, minor arrested." The charges stuck. She was suspended from school, lost her college scholarship, and suddenly everyone in town was whispering about us. I thought maybe the neighbor just wanted to humiliate us. But then I found out the real reason, months later, when a foreclosure notice showed up in our mailbox, and Greg Miller's name appeared again in a way that made my blood run cold. He didn't just ruin my daughter's life out of spite. He did it because he wanted our home. And by the time I learned the truth, Greg had no idea what was coming for him, or that I was already planning to show up at his foreclosure hearing with something that would destroy him just as thoroughly as he destroyed us. We moved to Cincinnati 3 years before Maya's Sweet 16. I took the job at a small outpatient clinic downtown, long hours, decent pay, benefits that mattered, because raising a kid on my own isn't cheap. The house was a fixer-upper in Oakley, cheap enough for us to afford a mortgage and close enough to the city so I could get to work without losing my mind. We painted the porch pink for Maya the first summer. It was the first home she really felt like hers. Money was always tight, but we made it work. I cooked, I doubled shifts sometimes, I learned to patch a leaky sink. Maya babysat the neighbor kids, walked the dog for old Mrs. Carver across the street, and she had that little laugh that made you think everything was going to be all right even when it wasn't. She earned her scholarship through late-night studying and a few summer programs. We planned for college in the way people with small incomes plan, carefully, with spreadsheets and calculators and a lot of hope. Greg moved in 2 houses down the winter after we did. He looked harmless at first, retired, always mowing his lawn with military precision. But his smile was thin and he liked the word rules. He started with small things. A passive-aggressive note about a basketball hoop, a call to the city about a mailbox that leaned 1 inch. We smiled, said sorry, fixed the mailbox. He escalated to complaining about the dog once. I told him to mind his business. He complained anyway. We tried to keep the peace. I worked nights, Maya studied. We kept our music at a reasonable level, invited friends over the way normal teenagers do. Greg watched every move like he was tracking enemies on a map. He'd sit on his porch every evening, drink cheap beer and stare. Once he told me, in a tone like he was delivering a public service announcement, that neighborhoods like ours don't hold up unless folks keep standards. I laughed it off then. I wish I'd taken it as a warning. When the foreclosure notices started landing in my mailbox last year, it felt like the floor dropped. A mistake at the bank, an adjustable rate that flipped, and suddenly we were underwater. I called the lender, filled out paperwork, took the hardship programs seriously. I worked with lawyers, with counselors, late nights on hold with faceless reps. Every option bought us a little time. Every option cost more money. What broke my heart wasn't the stress of the bills. It was watching Maya try to hold on to normal while I pretended I wasn't terrified. She skipped social events. She worked extra shifts after school to help. She started sleeping in my office because the creaks of the house felt like they were louder when she was alone upstairs. I lied to her about being fine. Parents get good at that. Soon after the arrest, when scholarship letters stopped coming and college paused into a gray maybe, I found out Greg had been quietly buying up foreclosure notices in the county for months. Small properties, liens, pre-auction bids. I tracked his name at the recorder's office one desperate night and found his signature on papers that made my stomach drop. He wasn't just grumpy, he was playing a long game. I printed out one of his bids and held it up to the lamp. The ink looked official. It was dated the week before Maya's party. He'd put himself in a position to buy low if something made our house lose value. I remember thinking, the kind of cold, clinical thinking that lives in people who never care about human cost. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I walked down to his driveway and rifled through the trash under the cover of a streetlight. I found a paper that made me stop breathing. The paper was folded in half, stained with beer and barbecue sauce. I remember my hands shaking as I opened it under the porch light. It was a copy of an incident report form, the kind used for police tips. Handwritten across the top in bold letters were the words suspected underage drug use. Under caller's name, someone had written G. Miller. I froze. My chest tightened like something had punched me from the inside. I reread it maybe 10 times, hoping I was seeing it wrong, that there was another G. Miller on our block, that maybe this was an old report from years ago. But right below the name, it listed my address. Our exact address. The date, the night of Maya's party, he didn't even try to hide it. I stumbled back to my porch, heart hammering. The realization hit me in waves. He had called the cops himself. He made up a drug report about a 16-year-old's birthday. He wanted them to come to make a scene to scare people off. He wanted chaos. And then it hit me, the foreclosure papers, the dates, the fact that our property value tanked after that incident hit the local news. Who would buy a house listed as the site of a teen drug party? Not many. But someone looking to buy it cheap? Someone who knew it'd go up for auction soon? Yeah, he'd manufactured it. The man didn't just ruin our reputation, he weaponized the cops to tank our home's worth. I took photos of the paper, front and back. I put it in a plastic sleeve like it was evidence in a crime show. Then I started digging. I went to the courthouse records room downtown during lunch breaks, scrolling through property records like a detective. Turns out Greg had a habit. He'd buy distressed houses at foreclosure, fix them up enough to flip, and rent them out under a fake LLC. Sometimes he'd sell them to his cousin. Other times to companies that were really just him using a different name. But what really made me sick was the timing. Every single property he'd bought had a neighborhood complaint or police incident right before it sold. A noise violation here, a vandalism report there, a domestic disturbance that never got verified. He'd call in fake complaints, tank the property's reputation, and then sweep in as the helpful buyer. I realized Maya's arrest wasn't personal, it was business. She was just collateral. I wanted to call the police, to show them what I found, but who was going to believe a struggling single mom over a retired, upstanding neighbor? He'd covered his tracks with charm and paperwork. The man even played poker with half the city council. I started documenting everything: timestamps, screenshots, the property sales, even his beer can brand from trash nights, in case I needed proof of his presence. It sounds crazy now, but when someone destroys your kid's life, you stop caring how you look. One night I saw him outside again. He gave me that smirk, lifted his beer and said, "Tough break with your girl, huh?" Kids these days, I smiled. A small, calm smile. That was the night I decided I wasn't going to the cops. I was going to the courthouse. And Greg Miller was going to find out what happens when you corner someone who's got nothing left to lose. I thought the worst betrayal would come from Greg. And it did, in the obvious ways. But the thing that cut the deepest was how close it came from someone who wrote my invoices and signed my forms like they were promises. Her name was Danielle Barnes. She had a tidy office over by MT Adams, a framed law school diploma, and that practiced sympathy attorneys put on when clients cry. I met her at a free clinic referral the week the bank sent the first final notice. She promised she'd fight the paperwork and keep us in the house, and she never once said anything that made me doubt her. She was a professional. I slept for the first time in weeks the night she agreed to take our case pro bono until things stabilized. After the party, while Maya was in cuffs, I drove to her office like a woman in a fog. I remember her leaning over my kitchen table with pamphlets and tea, telling me the arrest was a bump and we could fight it. "Cops make mistakes," she said, thumbed a highlighter over a statute number, and told me not to worry about the scholarship just yet. I believed her. I had to. She wrote "will file motions, diversion, expungement" in a notebook in that neat, certain script lawyers have, and every word looked like a lifeline. I signed retainer forms, mailed paperwork she asked for, fed the trust she cultivated because I had no other place to throw my hope. What I found in Greg's trash the night I rifled through it after the courthouse marathon was bad enough. The incident form with his name, his aggressive scrawl, it was proof a drunk man could plant. But when I started chasing names on the county recorder's site, Danielle's name came up in the property chain. She had filed an affidavit of counsel on behalf of the lender months earlier, the same lender who was now breathing down our neck. She'd submitted documents exactly one business day after Greg's purchases. I thought maybe it was coincidental until I saw the dates line up like arrows. I didn't know how to answer that, not really. So I did the stupid, desperate thing. I called her, pretending to be calm, asking how the foreclosure filing was proceeding. She was soothing and busy, like always. After I hung up, something in me broke, the part that prevented me from tearing people apart when I was desperate. I drove to her office and waited in the car until her light went out. When she came to the door and locked it, she didn't notice I slipped in behind her. Her desk was a shrine of competence. Neat piles, a coffee mug that read, "Trust the process." I told myself I was only going to ask questions. I wasn't going to take anything. But there was a slim manila envelope sitting by the shredder. I opened it like it was a book I'd always been meant to read. Inside were printed emails, chain after chain, between Danielle and someone named G. Miller. They weren't random notes. They were plans. At first the emails looked mundane, scheduling, visits, county meeting times, but then the language shifted. "Need a call placed night of party, public disturbance," one read. "Will confirm officer participation," another. One email had a line that made me throw the paper across the room. "Make sure the report lists drug activity. Press will bite." Danielle had written things I trusted her to fight against. She had orchestrated a report that ruined my daughter. I sat on her office floor with those papers in my lap until my knees trembled. The woman who had nodded while I cried, who had written, "We'll get through this," on a sticky note and stapled it to my file. She was arranging the whole thing, the timing, the legal paper trail that would make our defense look weak and our house cheap. She had taken the payments, filed the motions that would slow us just enough, and handed Greg a path. Betrayal tastes like bile. It felt worse because it was surgical. Someone I invited into my life had been slicing it away. I left her office without confronting her. I drove home in a fog, clutching the emails and feeling the shape of a plan form in my head. Not a legal plan, not yet, but something colder. If she could betray us for cash and convenience, then everything about this fight changed. This was no longer just about proving an evil neighbor lied. This was about exposing a rotten network that had threaded through my life and strangled my daughter. I mailed copies of the emails to myself and kept the originals. Then I called two people I'd sworn I wouldn't: a reporter at the Enquirer I'd once helped with a source, and a woman at the county clerk's office who owed me a favor. I told them I had something ugly. The foreclosure hearing was 3 days away. I had an envelope with damning emails and no legal strategy beyond rage. I also had something else I didn't expect: a phone number in one of Danielle's emails that belonged to a cop who'd been on site the night Maya was arrested. I slept for 3 hours and then got up and made coffee. The next morning I stood in the mirror and realized I wasn't the same scared woman who had walked into Danielle's office the first time. I had proof. What I didn't know was how to use it without getting arrested myself. I spent the next 2 days awake on caffeine, fury, and panic. I didn't tell Maya everything, only that I was handling it. She was too broken to hear more lies, so I just kept repeating the one truth I could promise. He won't get away with it. The foreclosure hearing was set for Friday morning. Greg would be there, probably smug and freshly shaved, waiting for the judge to stamp the final order so he could scoop up our home for a third of its worth. Danielle, my lawyer, would likely stand beside him or file something after the fact to make it all look legal. I needed a plan, not just payback, but a public reckoning. Something that would make every smug smile vanish off their faces in front of witnesses, cameras, and the same courthouse that had allowed them to ruin us. So I started assembling it. First, I met with the reporter Rachel from the Cincinnati Enquirer. We met in a coffee shop by Fountain Square, and I slid the envelope across the table like it was contraband. She opened it, eyebrows rising with each page. When she hit the email thread between Danielle and Greg, her hand went to her mouth. "Jesus Christ," she whispered. This is coordinated property fraud. You're saying she worked with him to crash your value and buy the house?" I nodded. "I'm saying they used the police to make it happen. They used my kid." She exhaled hard, already typing notes on her phone. "I can't promise front-page coverage without verification," she said, "but if you give me permission to contact internal affairs and confirm the officer mentioned in these emails, I can run it. This is systemic." I gave her everything. Names, dates, screenshots, even the badge number from the officer's report. Rachel promised to have something ready by Friday morning, just in time for the hearing. Next, I went to the county clerk's office. My friend there, Kendra, pulled the foreclosure docket for me. When she saw Greg's name next to Danielle's legal signature, she frowned. "You sure you want to poke this bear? These people know how to bury things." "I'm done being buried," I said. She printed me copies of the filings, stamped official. Then she leaned close and whispered, "You didn't hear this from me, but Danielle filed that motion personally, not under her firm. She doesn't want this tied to her company." Perfect. That meant if this went public, her partners would drop her faster than she could shred a file. By Thursday night, everything was in motion. I had the signed incident report from Greg's trash, the email chain connecting him and Danielle, the foreclosure documents linking them legally, and a reporter with a verified story queued for morning publication. But there was one more thing I needed to make it airtight: the cop. The same one who arrested Maya. His name was Officer Clay Hughes. I'd found his number in the emails, but I wanted him recorded. So I called. I told him I was following up on the incident report from last March and asked if he remembered who called in the tip. He said, "Can't disclose that, ma'am." But when I mentioned the words "false police report," his tone changed fast. "Look," he said quietly, "that night wasn't standard procedure. The call came from someone high up. We were told to respond fast and make a scene." "Who told you?" I asked, keeping my voice even while my heart pounded. He paused, then said, "All I know is the dispatcher said the report came from a verified source, someone connected to county housing enforcement. I don't know names, don't drag me into it." Then he hung up. That was enough. Danielle was county housing counsel part-time. It tied her directly to the false report. Friday morning, I dressed in black, tied my hair back, and packed every piece of evidence in a plain manila folder. Maya watched me from the couch, eyes hollow. "Mom," she whispered, "don't do anything that gets you arrested." I kissed her forehead and said, "Sweetheart, today we're not the ones getting arrested." When I pulled into the courthouse lot, Greg's truck was already there, freshly washed, gleaming. He stood outside smoking, wearing that same arrogant grin he'd had the night of Maya's party. Danielle walked up moments later, sleek in a gray suit, pretending not to see me. I smiled as I climbed the courthouse steps, folder tucked under my arm. Because what they didn't know was that Rachel had scheduled her article to go live in 1 hour. And she'd told me something that made my stomach twist and my mind race, something I didn't see coming. The emails weren't the only evidence she'd found. Danielle wasn't just Greg's legal partner. She was his half-sister. When Rachel told me that, I just sat there in my car staring at the courthouse doors, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. "His half-sister?" I asked, barely able to process it. Rachel's voice crackled through the phone. "Yeah. They share a father. Records from Hamilton County show the same last name before Danielle changed hers after law school. He left them a small inheritance together that started their LLC. I think they've been running this property flip scheme for years. You're not their first target, just their sloppiest one." It hit me like a gut punch. Every meeting, every fake smile, every hang in there, she'd been running damage control for her own brother. I realized she'd known everything from the start. The fake police call, the setup, even the exact timing of the foreclosure auction. She wasn't just his legal partner, she was the strategist behind the whole thing. I felt sick. But I also felt focused in a way I hadn't in months. If they thought they were about to walk into that courtroom and watch me lose everything quietly, they were about to learn what it feels like to have your world collapse in front of witnesses. I went inside, signed in, and took a seat near the back. The room smelled like old wood and coffee. Greg sat up front with Danielle, whispering to her like he owned the place. I caught his reflection in the polished bench rail, his smirk was back. He even waved at me, the bastard. The judge came in, shuffled some papers, and called the case. Danielle stood smoothly, introduced herself, cited the foreclosure code section like she'd done it 100 times. Greg leaned back, arms folded, smug. When it was my turn, I didn't argue about payments or hardship. I didn't beg. I opened my folder, slid the top document toward the clerk, and said, "Your Honor, before you proceed, I'd like this entered into the record as evidence of fraud." The judge looked surprised but motioned for the clerk to collect it. Danielle turned around sharply. Inside that folder was the signed police report from Greg's trash, copies of the emails, the stamped property records, and a note from the Enquirer confirming publication of a story that morning titled, "County Attorney and Retired Officer Implicated in Property Scheme." The judge scanned the first few pages, frowning. "Miss Barnes," he said slowly, "this document shows correspondence between you and the plaintiff regarding a police operation." Danielle's face went pale. "Your Honor, these are taken out of context." He cut her off. "Did you have a prior familial relationship with the plaintiff?" You could have heard a pin drop. Greg's grin faltered for the first time. Danielle stammered, "That's irrelevant." "No, ma'am," the judge said sharply. "That's material." The bailiff handed the judge a printed copy of the article Rachel had sent. The headline stared up at him in bold black ink. He skimmed it, then looked up with a mix of confusion and anger. "Is this accurate?" he asked her. Danielle tried to speak, but Greg exploded. "This is bull, she's making it up." He stood, red-faced, shouting, "She's a crazy woman who can't pay her bills." The judge banged his gavel. "Mr. Miller, sit down or I'll hold you in contempt." I sat perfectly still. My heart was hammering, but my voice came out steady. "Your Honor, I have reason to believe the foreclosure was engineered through a false police report coordinated by these two individuals, who then used the resulting public record to depress the value of my property for personal gain." It was the calmest thing I've ever said, and it landed like a grenade. The judge ordered a recess and told both parties to stay put while he verified the integrity of the filings. Greg stormed out into the hallway, Danielle trailing behind him, whispering furiously. I followed. They didn't see me at first, but I saw them arguing near the elevator. Greg's voice was sharp. "You said no one would trace it back," Danielle hissed. "You're the idiot who didn't burn the copy." "I told you to shred everything." I stepped forward then. "You two really should work on your communication," I said quietly. "You're great at destroying lives, though." Danielle turned, eyes wide. "You have no idea what you've started," she snapped. "You think you're going to win, you just painted a target on yourself." That's when I pulled out my phone and hit play. Their entire hallway conversation, the fight, the admissions, was recorded, loud and clear. Greg's mouth fell open. Danielle lunged for the phone, but I stepped back. "Oh, and by the way," I said, "Rachel's live streaming outside. You're already trending." Her face went white. It wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. Because the next day, when the investigation opened, I finally learned why Greg had done it. Not just greed, not just money, something colder. Something that made my blood run ice. When the story hit the morning news, everything exploded. Reporters camped outside our street. Cops started asking questions about Greg's anonymous tips, and Danielle's law firm suspended her the same day the county announced a fraud investigation. But none of that was satisfying. Not yet, because even after all that, there was still one question that kept me awake that night: why my house? There were dozens of foreclosures in our county. Dozens of struggling families they could have targeted, but he chose us. He planned every step of this, from the fake call to the cops to the public humiliation of my kid. It felt personal. It was. 2 days after the hearing, a detective from the county's white-collar crimes unit called me in for an interview. His name was Detective Conway. middle-aged, calm, that kind of measured tone that made you feel safe and uneasy at the same time. I gave him everything: the papers, the emails, the recording, the timeline. He listened carefully, flipping through pages, nodding, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Then he slid one of the pages back toward me, the property deed. "You ever look into the history of this address before you bought it?" I frowned. "No. It was a foreclosure when I got it." "Why?" He pointed to a name listed 2 owners back, Ronald Miller. "Greg's father," Conway said quietly. "This was his house 20 years ago. He lost it in a bankruptcy." It felt like my stomach dropped out. Greg hadn't just picked my house for a deal, he'd picked it because it used to be his. He'd grown up in it. Every time he saw Maya's birthday decorations, my garden, the porch we painted pink, he was looking at the house his father lost, and we had turned into a home. "He's been trying to get it back ever since his dad died," Conway continued. "When you bought it, he was already making noise with housing enforcement, calling about zoning issues. We found half a dozen complaints under aliases, all from him." I stared down at the paper. I could almost hear Greg's voice again, that sneer when he said, "Not in my neighborhood." But that wasn't even the worst part. Conway leaned back, sighed, and said, "There's more. We found messages between Greg and his sister about your daughter's scholarship. She works part-time at the county's youth outreach program. She pulled the name list for that scholarship before it was awarded." I blinked. "What?" He nodded grimly. "They knew your daughter's name months before the party. They targeted you because they knew losing that scholarship would cripple your finances faster. The drug party accusation wasn't random. It was to kill her future, make it harder for you to recover, so when foreclosure hit, you'd fold. They wanted this house, cheap and uncontested." My throat went dry. "They destroyed a 16-year-old's life to buy a house back?" Conway's face hardened. "I've seen greed before, but this was revenge. His father drank himself to death after losing this place. He blamed the banks, the neighbors, everyone, and Greg blamed whoever lived here after. You just happened to be next. It was like all the pieces snapped into place: his glares, his constant complaints, his obsession with standards. He wasn't protecting the neighborhood. He was reclaiming his father's ghost." That night, I walked through the house in silence. Every creak in the floor, every dent in the wall, every photo Maya had taped to the fridge suddenly felt like it existed under someone else's grudge. He hadn't just ruined our peace. He'd made us players in his twisted family tragedy. And when I thought about him sitting on his porch, drinking beer, laughing while cops pinned my daughter down, I knew exactly what my next move would be. The hearing had been a public humiliation. Now it was time for something colder. Something that would hit him where it really hurt. Not in court. In his legacy. By the time the investigation started gaining traction, Greg and Danielle had already gone underground, closed social media accounts, lawyered up, and ducked every camera they could. But it didn't matter. The damage was already done. The Enquirer story had legs, and it spread fast. Local TV, online forums, even a national property law podcast picked it up under the title, "The Siblings Who Weaponized Foreclosure." And still, that didn't feel like enough. Because when someone destroys your kid's reputation, an article doesn't fix it. Maya was still dealing with whispers, still carrying that scarlet letter from the arrest that shouldn't have happened. So I stopped thinking like a victim. I started thinking like Greg. Cold. Strategic. The detective told me there'd be hearings, maybe indictments, but he couldn't guarantee restitution or a reversal of Maya's record anytime soon. Bureaucracy moves slow. I didn't want slow. I wanted permanent. So I went after the one thing Greg loved more than money: control. I learned from Conway that the county could seize any property tied to ongoing fraud investigations if it was proven those homes were purchased under false pretenses. That included all of Greg and Danielle's LLC properties, 8 of them, scattered across Cincinnati and nearby towns. I worked with Rachel and a nonprofit housing advocacy group that took up my story. Together, we petitioned the court to freeze the deeds pending investigation. It worked. The judge ordered a freeze pending review of questionable acquisition methods. Every rental, every flip project Greg owned suddenly became untouchable. Tenants stopped paying him when the news broke. Contractors quit. The bank started circling again. Meanwhile, Danielle's license was suspended by the bar. She tried to claim the emails were forged until the IT department at her firm turned over server logs proving she'd sent them. Within 3 months, Greg was drowning. The same man who once stood on his porch, laughing at my crying daughter, now spent his days at county offices begging for leniency. Every property he'd schemed to steal gone or under review. Every ally gone. But the real closure came 6 months later. The county auctioned off the very house he lived in, his father's old home, the one he'd bought back years earlier. Foreclosure. Poetic, really. I showed up that morning quietly with Maya by my side. She was stronger now, therapy, tutoring, rebuilding her GPA. She held her head high when we saw him there. Greg looked like a ghost, pale, gaunt, unshaven. When he saw me, he froze. He probably thought I was there to gloat. I wasn't. I was there for paperwork. Because with the help of Rachel's nonprofit, I'd arranged for our house, the one he tried to steal, to be transferred into a community trust in Maya's name. It would never be flipped, never foreclosed again. But that wasn't the only surprise. When the auction for Greg's house opened, no one bid, not a soul. The reputation he'd built, smug, cruel, manipulative, had spread across the county. Contractors refused to touch it. Investors stayed away. After 3 failed rounds, it defaulted to county ownership. And then Rachel told me something poetic. The county intended to convert it into transitional housing for single parents and at-risk teens. The same kind of people Greg spent his life trying to shove out. As we left the courthouse that day, I looked back once. Greg sat alone on a bench, head in his hands, reporters circling. Maya squeezed my hand and whispered, "He deserves worse." I smiled, a small, tired smile. He deserves to live with himself. We drove home in silence. For the first time in a long time, the house felt safe again. The air was ours. The lights were warm. When we walked inside, Maya looked around and said, "You think he'll ever understand what he lost?" I looked at her, my daughter who'd been dragged through hell and still found her way back, and said, "No. But everyone else will remember." And then I taped the Enquirer headline to the inside of our kitchen cabinet, right above the mug hooks. Every morning when I make coffee, I see it, a reminder that sometimes justice isn't loud. It's steady. It's relentless, and it always, always comes due.